On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's time for the Real World Maritime Edition. I'm your guest VJ, Sal Mercogliano. It's almost like we're doing MTV here with a Real World episode. Although MTV, not music, but Maritime TV. But that would be a copyright infringement because a good buddy of the show, Dave Gardy, actually runs Maritime TV. If you're unfamiliar with Maritime TV, you should go check it out. It's at maritimetv.com. He actually has a great interview with the departing head of the Maritime Administration, Ann Phillips. Dave Gardy and the crew over at Maritime TV have much higher production values than I do here in my office at my house. I want to talk today about a confirmation hearing that was just held up in Washington. The Commerce Committee of the U.S. Senate sat down and met with Sean Duffy. This is President Trump's nominee to become Secretary of Transportation to replace Pete Buttigieg, who had been nominated and served under the Biden administration. Sean Duffy is a really interesting person to serve in this role. Amazing background, very unique background, I will say. So the reason for the Real World is because he was a contestant on the Real World Boston. Matter of fact, in a Road Rules episode, he met his wife, who was at the hearing with their 9 children. I say that again, 9 children. Duffy comes from a family of 11 children. I have 1 child, and it's killing me. I'm 27. Look at me. I'm like dead. I'm like dead here with 1 child. How he does it with 9, I don't know. I'm just kidding. My son is great. Love my son to death. Duffy has been serving as a co-host for The Bottom Line on Fox Business. He's a member, obviously, of the Republican Party, served as the representative from Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District from 2011 to 2019, been an attorney general for a county in Wisconsin, so a very extensive background in politics. Now, in terms of transportation, maybe not the deepest knowledge of transportation, but his hearing was an interesting one to see. He was introduced to the Commerce Committee by the 2 sitting senators from Wisconsin, Senator Johnson, a Republican, and Senator Baldwin, a Democrat. And this was a bipartisan love fest. Going to be some contentious Trump nominees who have to go before Senate. Duffy is not going to be that. He flew through this confirmation hearing with no problems whatsoever. Very little opposition at all. I mean, I can't even think of anything that was really a pushback against Sean Duffy. I think his background, his knowledge, his likability is fantastic. He will be the next Secretary of Transportation. Now, the vast majority of the questions he faced in the hearing dealt with what you would expect. A lot of road, a lot of aviation, a little bit of rail, and not much maritime at all. I want to show you part of his introduction talk he gave, very slight, brief talk about maritime.
Transportation impacts every aspect of life, from efficiently and securely moving products through our ports, to the ease of commuting from work to school, but also to church on Sunday. Together with President Trump and this committee and the entire DOT team, I would hope to usher in a golden age of transportation.
So a very brief statement by designee Duffy on his role as the Secretary of Transportation, but he hit all the key things. He talked about road, he talked about rail, talked about aviation, and there you hear him talking about ports. Let's look at the key questions that came up on maritime. Now, there weren't a lot of them. What we heard was a couple of questions about LNG production. We heard a couple of questions about ports. There was a couple of key questions about the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and infrastructure, and also on supply chain. So the first question that he fielded on the maritime sector came from the chairman of the committee, Senator Cruz from Texas.
There are currently 5 applications for licenses to allow deepwater ports to operate and transfer oil and gas on ships at sea pending before the United States Maritime Administration, or MARAD. These applications have been pending for the entirety of the Biden administration, nearly quadruple the maximum time limit for review under the statute. In addition, the Biden administration thoughtlessly and needlessly forced one company, the Texas-based Delfin LNG deepwater port, to start its application from scratch after slow-walking it for more than 5 years. President-elect Trump has promised to jumpstart American energy independence when he takes office. Will you commit to this committee that, if confirmed, one of the first things you will do is direct MARAD to issue these 5 licenses consistent with the statute.
So this is not a new line of questioning for Senator Cruz. He asked designee Ann Phillips, when she was up to be the Maritime Administrator, these same questions. And if you go over to the Maritime Administration's website on pending applications, you find several of these applications that have been on hold. So, for example, the Blue Marlin Shore Port, this was submitted back on October 1st of 2020. This is for an oil export facility with a capacity of 80,000 barrels per hour, 1.9 million barrels per day. The Blue Water oil export facility with a capacity of 1.9 million barrels per day was submitted back in May of 2019. The new Fortress facility down in Louisiana was submitted back in March of 2022 with a proposed capacity of 2.8 million tons per year. Gulf Link in Texas, oil export facility with a capacity of 1 million barrels per day back in 2019. The West Delta facility for liquefied natural gas with a capacity of 900 million standard cubic feet per day was submitted back in 2019. If you look under licenses not issued, you find the Delfin LNG. This is the one that Senator Cruz was talking about. This is a deep water LNG export facility that can export 657.5 million standard cubic feet per day. That application was received back in 2015. Back in April of 2023, Delfin submitted an environmental impact assessment to both the Maritime Administration and the Coast Guard. And on July 19th of 2023, they submitted an updated financial plan. On April 17th, 2024, MARAD notified Delfin after a thorough review of the new financial and operation plans, MARAD would not be issuing Delfin a deep water port license. Duffy said the following.
I commit to following the law, and I understand from you and from the president how important American energy independence is and how important these applications and permits are to making sure that happens.
MARAD's responsibility, which is under the Secretary of Transportation, are the 4 horsemen. These are the heads of the 4 different transportation modes: road, rail, aviation, and maritime. Previously under Ann Phillips, had the responsibility to review those applications and say yay or nay in 365 days. And in many cases, it went far beyond that. Matter of fact, one of the things they did was tell them that, they needed more information, so they reset the clock, so to speak. And so what should have been a 1-year process took multiple years. And Duffy is saying that he will expedite that. Whoever becomes the next Maritime Administrator, this is going to be a key issue, is the authority for, or the authorization to build or not build these ports. The next question came from the ranking member of the Democratic Party on the committee, Senator Cantwell, and she asked the question that you knew was going to get asked of a Secretary of Transportation when it comes to maritime.
Are you a supporter of the Jones Act?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to argue that's one of the shortest discussions of the Jones Act ever in the history of the Commerce Committee, ever. I mean, it's right up there. Are you a supporter of the Jones Act? Yes. For those of you who don't know, the Jones Act, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, today what people refer to as the Jones Act deals with one particular section of the Jones Act, and that is Section 27, which refers to cabotage. That is the movement of goods between U.S. ports on a U.S. flagged, U.S. owned, U.S. built, U.S. crewed vessel. However, there are other aspects of the Jones Act that are really important. The Jones Act also covers things like international trade. Most people don't realize that. I talked about that in a video where Spain told a U.S. ship not to come into its port because it was carrying cargo destined for Israel. That was an issue Spain had because of the ongoing issue between Israel and Gaza. And then we have the issue with Maersk just announcing that they're cutting off service to Alaska. They're withdrawing their ships from the Alaska trade. One of the things that the Jones Act does is provide dedicated service to U.S. ports. One of the fears is if you don't have dedicated U.S. service, you will lose it. Now, the downturn of the Jones Act is it provides expensive service because you're employing American ships, American crews. They tend to be more costly than foreign ships. So the Jones Act is always an issue that is raised with Secretary of Transportation. You'll see it with whoever becomes the designee to be the Maritime Administrator. It is a common thing. I will do a whole separate video on the Jones Act in my Shipping 101 series. It is a polarizing issue. My view is it needs reform. Maritime legislation always needs reform because the maritime industry is always evolving. We haven't had a major reform of maritime legislation since 1970. So, I mean, it's been a long time. It is well in need. All right, next question that Duffy dealt with had to do with port expansion and supply chain, and it came from, of all places, the senator from Delaware.
As we discussed in my office, the Department of Transportation plays a critical role in our global competitiveness. It impacts our economy, but we also focus on workforce, supply chains, which is vitally important to me, and infrastructure. And we've had some conversations here before about port expansion. And we know that the bipartisan infrastructure law provided $2.25 billion for the Port Infrastructure Development Program to improve our nation's ports. And in my state, we have Port Wilmington that we discussed. And right now, we are in the midst of an expansion project that will not only help our economy globally, but it will also create good-paying jobs. We commit to supporting additional funding for the Port Infrastructure Development Program in the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization.
Let you know, I understand how important our ports are to American commerce, making sure the great products that we produce in this country have a pathway to countries around the world that go through the great ports like the one in your community. Also, we saw during COVID, when this supply chain breaks down, we need to make sure that we can get products from around the world into this country that we don't produce. And so I would welcome the opportunity to work with you to make sure that we have the resources to make sure that our ports can meet the needs of today's economy.
I think it's so fascinating that a senator from Delaware, I mean, very small, I mean, the small state, I mean, it's 3 counties. I mean, come on, you sneeze, you go through Delaware. But they're talking about the Port of Wilmington, not a major port at all, but we're talking about port expansion, and we're talking about over $2 billion in port infrastructure funds. I think there needs to be more oversight and control from the federal level, ensuring that we have a port strategy. We really need to be developing a port strategy in the United States. And again, this is a vital role. This is something that under the Secretary of Transportation and the future Maritime Administrator, we need. We need a port strategy. You know, if the strategy is to have 4 big ports, LA, Long Beach, Houston, Savannah, New York, New Jersey, then, you know, the other ports can, you know, what do we care? But if you do that, understand that if you lose one of those big ports, you're out of luck. And one of the things that we learned from the incident in Baltimore with the Dolly is how vulnerable ports are to damage and how easily they can be shut off. And while Port Wilmington is not a huge, massive port, it does give you some measure of backup should a major port fall. And if you develop Wilmington on the Delaware River along with Philadelphia, and that gives you more ingress into U.S. ports. On that same thread, I want to fast forward a little bit and go over to Senator Rosen for Nevada. Now, Nevada and maritime? Sal, what is going on here? I'll let Senator Rosen explain.
People don't know is that Nevada, we actually have a couple of ports along I-80 and I-15. They're inland ports. Why are they important? It's not just for travel and tourism. It's for the shipping lanes. You know, the ports of San Francisco and Los Angeles, we want to bring those goods in. We drop them off in Nevada, I-15 and I-80, the 2 major arteries going into the country from the West Coast. And that allows those trains and trucks to go back, and it really relieves the congestion in our supply chain. So it's really important. Will you commit to being sure that we expand have the Brightline project? Of course, that brings travel and tourism, but we really have to expand our freeway capacity in order to also help with our supply chain, which helps economic input everywhere, right?
You did confuse me when you said in our meeting that you have the biggest port or one of the biggest ports.
We do. No, it's not the biggest port, but we do have inland ports. So, and it is really to drop those containers off to move in, right?
The point is really well made, and I would welcome the chance to continue to work with you on the needs of Nevada and the infrastructure around these containers, and also the projects of rail and roads.
The idea of Nevada having a port is not unusual. I live in North Carolina. If you go to North Carolina Ports, the website, You see that North Carolina has 3 ports. The port of Wilmington, not Wilmington, Delaware, this is Wilmington, North Carolina. The port of Morehead City, which is largely a bulk facility. And then Charlotte, the inland port, whereby cargo is brought from those 2 ports into Charlotte or from Charlotte to the ports for discharge. One of the key things we need to be thinking about that came home very clearly during the global supply chain crisis was how ports along the U.S. coast were being used as storage facilities. We saw that in LA and Long Beach in particularly, where we saw massive congestion in those ports because we couldn't move cargo in and out of the ports. A lot of the ports advertise the fact that you can leave cargo in them for long, protracted periods of time. We need to make the ports much more ingress egress friendly, get the cargo moving out of them. A lot of people will say, well, that means automation. It means data automation. It means the ability to increase the data automation so that we can track containers better, but we also need to fix the infrastructure that bridges this. This is why Secretary of Transportation is so important, because if you just focus on one mode of transportation, maritime, for example, you're missing out on the fact that when you bring those containers, for example, into a port, you need road, you need rail, you even need aviation at times to move the cargo out of the ports and into the inland system. They have to be married together. What you want is the Secretary of Transportation to kind of be the head coach, and then your, offensive, defensive, special teams coaches are those 4 kind of barons, the platform barons, the road, rail, aviation, and maritime, who oversee this. Last senator we go to is Senator Wicker from Mississippi, who's talking about New York.
Now, let me invite you to Kings Point, New York. So why is a Mississippi senator inviting the next Secretary of Transportation to New York? And it's because I am a board member of the Merchant Marine Academy. And you will not be the first Secretary of Transportation that I have hosted there. But I can assure you, my friend, that in addition to the 3 service academies, Air Force Annapolis and West Point, and the Coast Guard Academy, the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York, is a fine opportunity for young Americans. And it not only provides great officers for our Merchant Marine, but having been to graduation there and having been there as a member of the board and having served there for several years, also their graduates serve, many of them move right into the armed services. The 3 branches and the Coast Guard. And so it's a vital part of educating young Americans. It's a great opportunity for them. But as a board member, I can tell you, since it's not in DOD, and it is going to be under your jurisdiction, we have not been able to get the infrastructure repairs done that perhaps would have been easier had Kings Point been under the Pentagon. Many of the buildings, and I've seen this, exhibit crumbling concrete, leaking pipes, mold, inadequate heating, and inadequate air conditioning for the midshipmen. And yet, still, we have young people from all 50 states and the territories applying to come to this great educational institution and get an education, a world-class education that's unmatched anywhere. So I would invite you, as soon as you get your schedule, to make plans to come. It's just really about an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes from New York City, to come to Kings Point, see what we have there, see what the real estate is, and what a great tradition we have there, and principally to see the quality of the great young Americans who have an opportunity to get an education there. Will you commit during the year 2025 to coming to Kings Point and seeing the Merchant Marine Academy?
100%. And I encourage young Wisconsinites to take the commission that we could offer as members of Congress to go to the Merchant Marines. We never filled the slots, but I think this is an important role of the Department of Transportation. If we go together, I think it's Nikki from Senator Cantwell's team. Maybe she'll join us as well, and we'll go to a football game, is what she suggested. So
the discussion by Wicker on the Merchant Marine Academy is absolutely essential. The Merchant Marine Academy is the only one of the service academies that has actually lost members of its regiment while at war. Cadets from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy have been in combat, serving on ships out in the Red Sea, being attacked by the Houthi, for example. So we see Merchant Marine cadets on the front line all the time. This school needs help immediately. It really does. The infrastructure is crumbling. It really needs some support. Ironically, one of the things that is prohibited under the Transportation Department is to allow the alumni, which has a huge endowment of money, to assist and help the college. Why is it that the alumni can't contribute? For example, a huge state-of-the-art bridge simulator that has been literally sitting in boxes for 10 years because they can't get the authorization to build it and put it together. It's obsolete now. It's ridiculous. You should allow the alumni to contribute to this school so that we can see some investment. We should also have investment from the Department of Transportation. This school should be the premier logistics university in America. On the engineering side, on the deck side, we should be pumping out supply chain experts, logistics experts. All the military services should be looking at this university for its logistics experts. We need to do several things to improve the Merchant Marine Academy. If I was king for a day, this is what I'd be doing. Number one, allow the Merchant Marine alumni to contribute their money. Number one, easiest thing. Boom. They want to give, let them give. Second, let's resurrect the idea of a Merchant Marine War College. Merchant Marine War College is a upper level, graduate level program that should be producing graduates that can talk really highbrow Merchant Marine issues. The Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, Space Force, everybody has this. Why do we not do this? I have no friggin' idea, but we should. Third, we should bring back the U.S. Maritime Service. Hey, when President Trump was in last term, he created Space Force. Let's resurrect the U.S. Maritime Service. Every graduate of the King's Point should become a member of the U.S. Maritime Service. That requires service in the sailing Merchant Marine. You have to keep your license up. You have to maintain it. We create a Merchant Marine Reserve independent of the U.S. Navy. We can also bring in members of the Military Sealift Command, graduates from the state maritime academies. Under the Maritime Administrator should be an office that oversees this. This would assist mariners in maintaining their licenses. We should move licensing from the Department of Homeland Security, Coast Guard, back under the Maritime Administration. When you go get your pilot's license for aircraft, you don't go to the U.S. friggin' Air Force. You go to the FAA. Why don't you go to MARAD for your license? There are a lot of things that should be done that can be to fix what is going on right now. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, along with the sister institutions, and let me be clear, I'm not a graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. I graduated across the river at New York Maritime. It's ironic that two of the biggest maritime academies are right there across the river from each other. But I do teach for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy as an adjunct. I actually am in the engineering department. I teach a course in maritime industry policy in a master's in marine engineering program. But I think that we should see an expansion of the Merchant Marine Academy. I think it is a wonderful institution that does very unique things for it. It's really the only service academy that's geared toward an occupation. And all the graduates take a military commission in one of the branches, but they should take another commission in that U.S. Maritime Service because we should be promoting the U.S. Merchant Marine. I think Duffy is going to sail through this confirmation. I think he did fantastic. All the hearing, all the members were nothing but adoring Duffy. He has a great life story. I mean, seriously, him, his wife, 9 kids, one of them with Down syndrome, his oldest child, and his wife are in L.A. undergoing the fires. Duffy is a very likable guy. And he's a very competent guy. He is definitely one who can work across the aisles. This was asked multiple times of him by members of the Democratic and Republican members. One of the things that Senator Cruz talked about at the very beginning of this hearing is how likable the Commerce Committee is versus something like the Judiciary Committee, where it can be really pitchforks and kind of nastiness thrown at each other. You tend not to see that in the Commerce Committee. So I'll be interested to see Duffy's full confirmation before the U.S. Senate, and then his picks and how he administers it. I got to say that Pete Buttigieg, as Secretary of Transportation, did not do much in the maritime sector at all. His focus seemed to be almost overwhelmingly on aviation and travel, very little on ports. Even when Baltimore suffered the catastrophe of Dolly, you eventually saw him up there, but with very little input at all. I think maritime is on the forefront. You've got senators from Delaware, from Nevada, talking about global supply chain. This is the moment for maritime renaissance. We're seeing it with the Ships Act going through the U.S. Congress. We're going to see it with Duffy choosing key players in his administration and how he goes about dealing with issues on the maritime sector. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that, Sal? Well, you hit that super thanks button down below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly member. A lot of videos have been coming out. I did 2 videos on the Los Angeles fire, one on why not use fireboats and seawater, another on dry hydrants. That first video was ridiculous. Over 2 million views. Unbelievable. Thank you all for watching that. If you're a new subscriber to the channel, welcome to the channel. Appreciate having you on. We're going to talk about global shipping on this channel in ways that maybe you did not know. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.